This is the Convene podcast. My name is Maggie, Digital Media Editor. Welcome to another episode of the Convene Talk. Barbara, what have you picked for today's topic?
I picked a story that was in BizBash. It originally appeared in Meetingsnet. And the headline is How Planners Can Handle Hyper-Specific Attendee Dietary Requests. And so the story was really highlighting this trend towards when they asked for dietary restrictions for people being extremely specific, going beyond. I know the planners are very familiar with gluten-free and vegan and vegetarian, and then also requests that are related to religious traditions like kosher. But this was talking about attendees that were so specific, they said, and I don't know if this is an actual request or whether it's just an example of the kinds of requests, but it was that they could have peas if they were boiled, but not if they're steamed. Or I can't eat green vegetables, I can only eat yellow vegetables. And I thought it was really interesting. And I feel like I saw it a little differently than the writer of the article or the gist of the article, because I felt like the message was like, let's shut this down, that people are asking for these specific things and don't give people the opportunity to be so specific. They said out of 300 attendees, there would be like 10 that just wrote reams about their dietary restrictions. And then the article was also very good about giving some specific advice about how to communicate about the dietary restrictions that they were able to accommodate. So the place where I saw it a little differently is that this is like a really early trend. It seemed to me like if you were to collect these and analyze these, that people are really just asking for maybe more vegetables, or that nutrition has become a lot more important to them, that they don't want to go to meetings and eat rich sauces. They really want to know what they're eating. I have to follow a gluten-free diet. And I do remember when people thought it was frivolous, that gluten-free wasn't really necessary. I remember going into a restaurant and, saying, what can you tell me about gluten-free? And I meant about their menu. And the server said, well, some people think it's real. I don't know. And so I think that even though it's ridiculous, like I know that you cannot accommodate people that, peas, you're not going to say, here's the boiled peas and here's the steamed peas. But it does seem to me like this is like an early signal and worth paying attention to. So what's on your mind, Casey?
I'm glad you brought up the point about someone asking for steamed versus boiled food, because I did actually find in reading about this, and I've heard it myself, that the cooking process for certain foods actually impacts its allergic components. Cooking in different ways can change the structure of certain proteins and either reduce or increase someone's allergy to it. So a lot of times it's like raw versus cooked, but depending on what it is, it can also, the actual cooking process can change someone's reaction to it. In that case, it's probably better to just say, I can't eat peas, because that is very hyper specific. But like you said, some of these things that might sound a bit frivolous or silly to people who don't experience these food allergies are legitimate, and just because it's not something they experience doesn't mean it should just be like, oh, let's get rid of this trend. What do you think, Curt?
I think I'm laughing quite a bit because if I don't know, if I were doing the food at a place and they were like, I can't have mashed potatoes or not I can't have. I don't like mashed potatoes. I prefer 2 new potatoes boiled for 3 minutes and then lightly salted. You know, that's going to be a go home and eat and make your own food type of thing. But I do agree, allergies and, that kind of stuff and the gluten free, those are all like totally legitimate. But just the fact that, I don't like this kind of food over this kind of food, do you expect that they're going to make you a special plate just because you don't like something? I don't know. That seems a little crazy to me. But I was going back when we got the story, when I found out we were doing this, I went back into our archives just to take a look. And you said that, Barbara, at the top of this, you said about how it wasn't long ago that, the restrictions surprised people and people were sort of laughing at the restrictions. People, like gluten-free diets or vegetarian or vegan. But I was looking back and it wasn't that long ago that we were writing a lot about gluten-free and vegetarian and vegan being a thing and how you can accommodate people at events with these dietary restrictions. I mean, there were stories we were still writing that were sort of F&B 101 on dietary restrictions in 2019. We still had stories where we were sort of given the here's 5 tips, and they were basically, you can make this out of this, and that kind of stuff. It's not that long ago that we were doing that. So that's interesting. But I don't know. I still think I just don't like this. So please make this for me is a little bit of a little stretch, I guess. But that's just me. I eat everything. Who's next? Michelle's next.
Well, I'm glad you can eat everything because that's not the case for a lot of people. And I do think sometimes that people misunderstand the assignment. Like it's not like, oh, give us your preferences. Like, oh, I like pasta as opposed to beef. It's more about like, what are the things you cannot eat? That's the important thing. And I think it really depends on the destination and the venue, how careful they are. Just recently, I was somewhere where I'm highly allergic to shellfish, and I'm very careful about what I eat. But obviously, there was cross-contamination because I woke up with hives and a rash. And I'm lucky because it wasn't more severe. There are people who have more severe reactions, and I don't think a meeting planner or an organization wants to have a medical emergency on their hands because they weren't careful enough paying attention to what people's allergies are. So that does concern me, is that Barbara said the kind of attitude, well, this has just gone too far. People are being ridiculous. Yes, some people are, but I think you just need to really spell out when you're asking people, what are you allergic to, rather than what are your dietary preferences and what do you prefer to eat? Because it isn't like they're a guest at your dinner party. They have a lot of other people that they have to accommodate. So there just has to be a happy medium. Maggie, what do you think?
I agree with you, and the fact that it just has to be communicated in a different way. And what I liked in the article was that they focused on labeling the food, which I still feel is not very well done. And they said that the same thing in the article, that sometimes it's just not clear. And yes, you don't have to spell out each ingredient, but there are ways now that are very common for showing allergens in the food. And my pain point is not buffets, because they are mostly, again, it depends, but they're mostly okay labeled and you can see where there's gluten or dairy or whatever else. But when you're at a party or at a reception where there are canapes and they're coming with some food that's questionable, you can't figure out what's in there, then you try to ask the server. Often you have language barriers with some of the servers. You can't understand what they're saying, or they don't understand the question, or even if they say they say what's the name of the food, and for me that's not helpful because I don't know how that food is made locally. So that's my biggest pain point of how to understand what to eat at such places. So what I usually do is I just make sure I eat something before, because I know I'm not going to touch anything because I'm not aware of what's being given to me. So I think that's something that the industry needs to focus on a bit more. And I would agree that we'll see this trend, I don't want to say escalating, but moving further along, because biohacking becoming more popular in many places, and people trying to be very specific to their own health and tailoring everything to their own, their own being. So we'll see definitely things changing up in terms of food and what people would like to consume, and I think behave in general. So wellness will come to that as well, with all these early yoga sessions and runs when there has been a very late social event the previous night. I think those may change in the future as well.
I feel bad for meeting planners who have to navigate this because, on one hand, you have people with very serious health allergies. I have family members with like severe, like life-threatening allergies, one of which doesn't even eat at restaurants because she was like studied at Duke. It's crazy. And, you've got that camp, and then you have I prefer camp, which I think is two very different things. And to me, it almost seems like maybe, logistically during registration, when you send out questionnaires, maybe separate them, like put a section where you can either check or fill in a box that says, I have a medical allergy, like a legit, like celiac, life-threatening shrimp allergy, which my mother has. We've had to EpiPen her many times because she loves shrimp and she thinks that she can beat the allergy. I know, it's terrible. Finally, we made her stop. But she really loves shrimp. She grew up in Louisiana. What can I say? And then at the bottom, have a write-in for preferences. So you can gauge, maybe you have a lot of attendees who just really prefer vegetables, who don't eat a lot of meat or something. And then I hate to say this because we know that buffets aren't sustainable, but buffets in a lot of ways can accommodate people's preferences much better. You can build your own salad, you can build your own this, you can build your own that. So as much as we don't like those for sustainability reasons, I do think that a lot of times, I know I prefer that just because, when you go and sit down and it's served to you, you can't make those choices. And I have preferences, but I also don't want to be that person who's like I don't eat fish, cooked fish, but I eat raw fish. I'll eat like sushi and I'll eat all the types of seafood, but I don't want to be that like pain in the ass to an organizer and communicate that, and I'll make do. But when it's kind of a build your own situation or you have choices, I think that really helps a lot of people who just want to feel their best and just get what they need. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I want to just chime in on the labeling because I feel like that is so helpful, because there's so many things that you can make it one way and it's gluten-free, and then you make it another way. And there's a lot of ingredients that you're not familiar with, that I don't even know, that make it not safe to eat. And so that seems to me like kind of a very basic thing that you can do that's so helpful. The other thing that I was thinking about is that I just wrote a story about a wheelchair basketball tournament in Richmond, and they had an influencer who used a wheelchair, wrote a series of posts about where were the accessible restaurants and ways to get around Richmond. And it was super, super helpful and hospitable. I don't expect a conference to, really take care of all of my needs. But when you're in a place where you don't have a lot of options, you just get hungry. So I was thinking, if there's like an influencer, if destinations would say, here are restaurants that have a lot of vegetables, or and here's the gluten-free restaurants, or here's a gluten-free bakery. It'd just be so helpful. I just came back from Tucson, and I was really so pleasantly shocked. Every restaurant I went to labeled gluten-free options on the menu. Even the oldest restaurant, like the first, even before Arizona was a state, and that restaurant had like gluten-free. So I think that just communicating and letting people know, it's not like I do not expect anyone to change what they're doing for me. I just want to know what it is that's in front of me. And it's very helpful if somebody can let me know where I can get that. But I do always, I don't know about you, Maggie, I always have my little gluten-free stash of fill-ins. And I'm happy to say from Tucson, I pretty much came home with all of them, which is a first.
Yeah, I have that stash with me always as well.
Yeah.
Curt?
I just want to clarify that I do think that people with allergens and people with restrictions, medical restrictions, I think those things need to be accommodated. I was just thinking of the people who are just like finicky about certain things. I mean, having spent time with you, Barbara, and Maggie, having to go and find, we're sitting down, we had a restaurant where they have gluten-free items, but then you ask and the gluten-free item's not actually gluten-free because of something that's in there. I know it's a pain in the butt, and that's unfortunate, but I'm glad we were always able to find food for you that you could eat, though. And that's what's important, right? And vegetarians, they can always eat chicken. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
And by the way, one more note before we close. It's not only attendees that should be taken care of, but staff as well, because often when you put food for staff in the staff room, very often there are no gluten-free options. I mean, I'm speaking of experience here. So yeah, consider staff as well and give them choices, or at least ways to grab something else that's according to their dietary needs. And so thank you all for this discussion. I'm getting hungry, so I'm going to grab something gluten-free after this. As usual, you find the article that we spoke about in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, go give us a 5-star review. Subscribe if you haven't, wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more industry insights, go to pcma.org/convene. And until next time.